Reds, blues, maybe some purples, some officially opaque, but no greens. A race already bright red grows redder still as the only blue abruptly withdraws. And the legislature, can a party struggling to rebuild make headway against a still popular president? And also tonight, a predictable, inevitable exit at Fayetteville and the quest to return the glory to the gridiron. What it means inside the stadium and beyond, coming up on Arkansas Week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. It's a time of confusion at Fayetteville where the big ticket component of a storied athletic program is having difficulty selling tickets. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, the campaigns of 2020, we'll try to bring them into focus, if through two sets of partisan lenses. John Burris, shall we say, leans to the right. And Michael Cook, shall we say, leans decidedly to the left. Gentlemen, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Why don't we just begin this way, and John, we'll begin with you. What leaps out at you, if anything? First impressions of the ticket after it's closed.
The federal candidates and structure there has to be a disappointment to the Democratic Party. Mahoney pulling out at the hours after filing closed leaves them with very little options to challenge.
Now, this
Tom
is Josh
Cotton.
Mahoney,
That's right.
would have run for the Democratic nomination for the Senate.
That's right. Senator Elliott came in. State Senator Joyce Elliott filed to run against Congressman Hill. So that's where the most competitive race will be, but Congressman Hill won pretty handily last time and should again. Legislatively and the state legislature, Democrats were able to get over 50 filings in the state house, but lots of tough races, no path to winning a majority. It's really more of a fight about if they can chip away at the supermajority and get the House below 75. So I think for the most, there'll be a handful of those competitive primaries on the Republican side, some competitive generals, but for the most part, the Republicans have to be happy.
What is the basis? There's some intra-party tension, shall we say, here and there within the GOP. What's bringing that about? Ideology or personality?
In years past, there's been a fight over health care, Medicaid expansion. That's really defined the past 2 or 4 primary cycles. That's faded to a large degree. The governor really has engaged in primaries over the past 3 cycles and won virtually every race he's engaged in and defeated a lot of the loud voices who were fighting over that appropriation on DHS. So there's really one race where that's going to be relevant again, and that's John Cooper and Dan Sullivan up in Jonesboro. Cooper's the Senate incumbent. Sullivan is a House member challenging him. They've ran against each other before, and Cooper won. So it's less ideology, more personality, and just kind of one-offs as opposed to a broader movement over that Medicaid expansion fight that's defined the past few years.
Yeah, Michael Cook, first thoughts.
First thoughts, on the federal level, the Democrats did not. They did field candidates for the 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th district. Didn't find a candidate for the 1st district to challenge the Congressman Rick Crawford over there. As John alluded to a moment ago, and as you mentioned, the U.S. Senate candidate Josh Mahoney exited on filing day. So Democrats do not have a candidate for the U.S. Senate. I don't know if they'll be able to replace him or not. State law doesn't look like he'll be able to be replaced, so Democrats don't have a Senate candidate. On the legislative level, I thought Democrats did a good job of recruiting candidates on the legislative level. To piggyback on a phrase that John mentioned a moment ago, it is about chipping away. The Democrats are not going to win the majority of the House or the Senate next year. I think it's just a long slog of maybe winning a couple seats this cycle, a couple seats next cycle. But still, Democrats have some things to be happy about. They have some good candidates on the legislative level.
In legislative races and in congressional district races, obviously, turnout, certainly for the Democrats, is crucial. In a presidential election year, turnout can cut both ways, though, can it not, Michael?
I think turnout is going to be
Energize both bases.
It's going to be energized both bases, which Democrats just have historically had a tougher time of turning out their base. I think this time with the focus on the presidential level, we all know how Arkansas is going to vote in the 2020 election, but I think Democrats are still motivated to go out, vote against Trump, which does help these legislative seats and helping maybe pick up a few.
Yeah.
Maybe I think the Trump effect will be positive in Arkansas, and personally I have mixed feelings on him, but I can admit that Arkansas would probably be the last 6 electoral votes he gets. If he were to bottom out, we will be the last to ever vote against him. So I think you have to look at it as a net positive, him being on the ballot. And Senator Cotton running for re-election, even though he has no formal opponent, he's still going to be engaged. I worked on his 2012 and 2014 campaigns. He's organized and he supports people who ideologically agree with him, and that now that he's going to be a little bit more flexible, I think you'll see that help on the state races too.
He's rich too.
He's got 7 figures in the bank, and so between the president and that apparatus, and
we're talking about campaign treasurers.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And so, I think you have to look at it overall. This cycle, it couldn't have lined up better for Republicans in Arkansas.
To both of you, we're likely to see a flood of dark money, not only in federal races, but certainly we have a high-profile judicial race. You got one for the Supreme Court. Of course, under Citizens United, there's really, for the time being, at least, there's nothing anybody can do about it. Do you expect to see what I do, and that's just gushes?
I expect to. I think it's going to be more in the judicial level. You mentioned the high-profile judicial race. It's Circuit Judge Chip Welch from Little Rock against Barbara Webb, who was a former judge, former prosecutor out of Saline County. I'm sure that'll be a clash of the Titans race with plenty of money on both sides. One thing I would note, we talked about the partisan races a moment ago, but there is just going to be a sea change in our judiciary because of forced retirements of circuit judges across the state.
Judicial openings,
just in Pulaski County alone, there's 6 forced retirements, because when you hit 70, you have to retire or lose your retirement benefits. So you have dozens of judges across the state who have to leave. So I'm wondering if some of that dark money will be playing in some of these circuit judge races, because today's circuit judge is tomorrow's Court of Appeals judge or next year's Supreme Court candidate. So I think we'll see more of the dark money.
Yeah, John Burris, it almost certainly will, don't you think?
I do, but I have a perspective on it where it doesn't bother me as much. I think the courts, they call themselves nonpartisan, and I think they do that a lot of times to make themselves feel good. Just because they're nonpartisan doesn't mean they're not ideological. And because they issue rulings that make them such an ideological body or entity, branch of government, ideological entities invest and try to elect people that align with their ideology. And I think the courts put themselves in that position. And it is what it is. Citizens United, as you mentioned, made that possible. And it's not going to change anytime soon. Both sides spend a lot of money to invest in ideological justices, at least justices who align with their ideology.
But the big problem is we just don't, you can argue the good and the bad of it, but we just don't know where the money comes from. I think that's a major problem, whether they're for a liberal-leaning judge or a conservative-leaning judge, whatever. I think it's a horrible problem that we don't know where this dark money comes from, hence the phrase dark money.
Well, from an ideological standpoint, you usually do, if not the specific donor, and that's not to justify it anyway.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing. I think you should. I wish there would laws would be passed. There's been some attempts in the Arkansas legislature to force some of these groups to release their donors, but unfortunately, it's just not gotten past the Republican legislature. At the end of the day, sunshine and transparency is the best thing for our democracy.
Yeah. John Burris, you indicated before, I think the phrase was some reservations at the presidential level anyway. Apparently a great majority of Arkansans still don't have reservations yet. Witness the fact that scarcely a discouraging word has been uttered by any of the 6 federal delegates from Arkansas about Mr. Trump. Do you read the landscape? Do you look at the landscape and see still 60% plus?
Yes. And I don't, even though I've been vocal just in my social circle. I mean, I didn't vote for President Trump, and I probably won't again. But I don't fault our elected officials for being more reserved. I mean, they benefit from a working relationship with the president, and it's not their job to walk in and comment on the tweet of the day. I think everyone acknowledges that he says things they wish he would not say, but in the end, he has done a lot of what he promised he would do, which is promote a conservative agenda, and our congressmen have supported that. And I think you can make the argument that Arkansas is better served by having those conservative values promoted. And I think that's why they continue to take the positions that they do, and why I think Trump will win Arkansas quite handily.
Michael Cook, the proceedings that are now underway in the House of Representatives, no matter where it goes from here, do you see that in any way assisting that chipping away that you mentioned earlier?
In Arkansas, frankly, no, not at this time. We're a red state. Trump is popular here. He's going to get 58, 60% plus of the vote. I think on the national level, the impeachment is going to have severe consequences. But in Arkansas, I think they're still going to vote for Trump. I would say on the federal level, our 6 Republican federal office holders, they support Trump, but more importantly, they just politically can't oppose him in any form or fashion. Anytime you go against Trump as a Republican, you lose. You look at Senator Jeff Flake, who had a promising career. He came out against Trump. He's no longer in the U.S. Senate. You have other congressmen and senators along those same lines. So you have to be lockstep with the president, or you're out of politics.
Yeah, in fact, there's not much room for dissent in today's GOP, is there, John?
I think there can be. I do believe that, especially the national media is at fault for having what they call the palace intrigue. They want to report on the process and make want U.S. senators or congressmen to comment on the daily happening of process type things versus the policy that a lot of our congressmen want to talk about. And I don't think it's the job of our elected officials to comment on a bunch of process fights that people in that bubble really care about. It's their job to promote conservative ideology and the values of the people that elected them, and I don't fault them for staying out of that daily fray. I think people like Tom Cotton have disagreed with the president on major issues like China, like Russia, like protecting ourselves in future elections through action you can take, through sanctions, through technology, patent fights. He has made policy disagreements. Just because he doesn't get caught up in the daily scrum at the Senate basement building, walk over to the Capitol and give reporters the sound bites they want, doesn't mean he's not disagreeing.
No. Michael, I'll give you the last word. We're running short time.
Well, like I said, it'll be 2020 will be an interesting year. I think in Arkansas it's not going to be that particularly exciting here. We kind of know how a lot of these federal elections are going to go. There'll be some fights, but I think the big fight, of course, will be the presidential race nationally. I think that's going to be the focus of a lot of Arkansans in 2020.
A lot of ballot choices for Democrats anyway.
Definitely.
Gentlemen, thanks for coming in. John, Michael,
thank you.
Come back soon, please.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be right back. And now to Fayetteville, so to speak, and the Razorback situation. We're joined by Rex Nelson, senior editor of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and Beau Wilcox, freelance sports writer and blogger. Gents, thanks for coming in. Rex, let's go to you first. Obviously, what happened has happened with over the last couple of years with a coach now departed. The question now is what now? Obviously a search.
Yeah, a search will happen now. I mean, what you're faced with is a football program that is in total meltdown. The old saying, there's nothing worse than apathy. You'd rather have people mad than apathy. And Arkansas had reached the apathy stage. They announced the last game, 42,000 was the announced attendance. There probably weren't 30,000 in the stands in a stadium that seats 76,000. Remember we spent that $160 million to expand that stadium from 72 to 76. So I think they had to make the change. In fact, I think making the change now probably will mean an additional 10,000 people for the last game at War Memorial Stadium that wouldn't have been there. So you had to make the change now. The search starts now. Where that goes, we'll see in the weeks ahead. But it does give Hunter Yurachek, the athletic director, a little bit of a head start on those schools that will end up firing their coach at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, same question, Beau Wilcox, and beyond. What's the significance of this change?
Well,
it goes beyond athletics.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's obvious, as Rex pointed out, that this is a situation where Hunter Yurachek gets an opportunity from the fans' perspective, which is what I write from. I'm just an average Joe who loves the Hogs, and I want to see them succeed. I'm passionate about them. I can understand why others in the state aren't, but the reality is that we can all agree is that when the Hog football program is successful, the state's got a little bit of an edge to it that it normally doesn't have. And that's also true for the other athletic programs. Don't get me wrong, this is not a short sale on what's been going on in baseball, softball, women's gymnastics, women's soccer has been very successful. Obviously, there's a lot of renewed enthusiasm for both basketball programs right now, but this is the bell cow for the state, and it's a critical decision, and it can't be made haphazardly. And I think that it's arguable that at times during my lifetime, at least, and there haven't been that many coaches that have occupied this position, but over the years, it's been a decision that's sometimes been fraught with a little controversy, to say the least. And so if Yurachek can get the free rein, if you will, to be able to get out there and to scout who wants this job, who thinks they can build something up there, I think that if all the right pieces will fall into place, this is a big opportunity, but it's a classic Waterloo scenario. They need to be able to capitalize on it. If they're going to dismiss Chad Morris, which I certainly think they should have and were justified in doing based on performance, based on the declining interest and revenues, I think you have to pick up right now and say you're going to go forward full force and try to find somebody that A, is going to succeed or has a good chance to succeed, but also B, is somebody that is going to get some excitement. I don't mind going and seeing a losing team as long as they're improving. And I think that's where a lot of the apathy's coming in.
Yeah. Well, both, Rex, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Steve, the thing you have to understand, and all of us who are native Arkansans certainly understand this at the core, is that the head football coach at the University of Arkansas is the most high-profile figure in the state, period. Outside of the governor, maybe. But sometimes more so than the governor.
Depends on the
Certainly
season.
Makes a lot more money than the governor. But it is one of those people that really can hold Arkansas together. So you don't only want to hire a good X's and O's man. You don't only want to hire a good recruiter. You've got to go have somebody that can go out there and speak, who can go out and excite the state, as Beau said. And that was something Chad Morris just couldn't do. He did not seem comfortable ever, to me, in the public spotlight.
I agree with that.
Beau, you've touched on this, particularly in your columns for the Arkansas Times, but it's a question that's being asked more and more frequently. In the SEC, is Arkansas simply punching above its weight?
Well, the easy answer right now at a time like this, when you've had back-to-back 2-10 potentially, it's not the ink's not dry on this one, and I really do. I want to say that I'm really excited that Barry Lunny gets an opportunity, even if it's on a 2-game interim basis, to be the head hog for just a little bit. That's a neat experience for him, I'm sure, obviously, but for me, as somebody that watched him upset Tennessee in Neyland Stadium in front of 100,000 plus in 1992 when it was our first year in the SEC, there's a little bit of a sort of I guess you'd say a cyclical thing here with Barry now taking over for these last 2 games. And I'm like Rex, I think that there are going to be a lot more at the War Memorial game after Thanksgiving than there might ordinarily have been because of that decision. So that's even a good little positive start, just a little warm fuzzy here to end a couple of rough years. But to your point, Steve, about the fan apathy and the discontent and the fact that, to touch on Rex's point about Chad Morris's maybe lack of engagement here, I think it's important for fans to get a good positive vibe. I don't think the search needs to drag on forever. I think that the optics, as they say, are really important this time around because you have so many more people on social media, on message boards even than used to be, on various blogs and other outlets. and we're crying for success. And I think that you can still succeed in the SEC. The facilities are there. The Northwest Arkansas area is beautiful, and I know that may or may not have limited appeal to a prospective college athlete, but I do think I think that we can't give up on the SEC dream, if you will, just yet. I think maybe winning it might be out of stretch, but being a consistent competitor is what I think most people can reasonably expect.
Hey, let's not forget Arkansas has been to 3 SEC football championship games. Ole Miss can't say that. Mississippi State can't say that. Vanderbilt can't say that.
And all 3 of those were within the first, 11 or 12 years of being in the league.
Absolutely. So I am one of those that believe that, yes, Arkansas, if you re-energize a statewide fan base in a state of 3 million people, you don't have the division that, say, a Mississippi has between fan bases. If you bring a person in that can do that, yes, they can compete in football and be competitive year in and year out with the right person in the SEC.
Well, along those lines, or ancillary to this, is the millions of dollars that are involved in the head coaching job, particularly when the head coach goes away. These are eye-opening sums, even if much of it is in private dollars. Some of it, anyways.
And Hunter Yurachek has touched on this, that we can't be alone, but I wish everybody would follow me on let's getting rid of the size of these buyouts. I think it is an unsustainable business model, frankly, for college football.
To say the least, I agree. I think that you can't, for starters, you actually disincentivize a person from working very hard at their craft, in my opinion. I think human nature takes over there. You tell somebody like Brett Bielema that after a couple of trending upward seasons, we're basically going to take care of you and your wife and your young child for life at this point. I'm not making any accusations about who worked harder than anybody else, but I certainly can understand why, if you were to be on the receiving end of a sum like that, that your incentive to work might be defeated somewhat. I hate to say that. That's a really cynical view, perhaps, but I do think it's a legitimate one because we've seen it happen. And I really think that I agree that there's going to have to be a sea change in the whole contract structure here. While I do the writing thing too, I'm also an attorney, and so I'm in the unusual position of being able to say that I think that, from a legal perspective, I'd like to see us use a little more discretion and prudence when we execute these deals with these coaches, especially when they come in having only won 14 games in 3 seasons, never beating a Power 5 school. You just got to use some sense. And I just think that that's been absent the last couple of arrangements.
Mutual assured bankruptcy across the conference.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah, well, and finally this. Read a piece New York Times just the other day, one in a series that has pretty thoroughly documented the decline in participation in football at practically, starting in junior high, high school, and collegiate. Nobody in their right mind expects football to go away in our lifetimes and maybe even beyond. But plainly, concerns over injuries, long-term disability from contact sports, particularly football, has to make the recruiting pool shrink even further or more difficult to crack, as well as raise the front end costs.
The sport has 2 huge issues right now. One is the decline in the number of kids that are participating, thus the pipeline that you mentioned in the sport of football. The other one is the decline in fans who are actually sitting in the stands. Stadiums that used to be full for every SEC game. You look around now, there are plenty of empty seats, the big screen TV, the replays, getting on your computer and getting instant stats. All of that has become too easy for the fan to stay home. So those are 2 overriding issues that affect not only Arkansas, but all of the other 129 teams that play football at the football bowl subdivision level.
Yeah.
I think you would also say that the analogy from the banking collapse was the too big to fail. And you look at some of these programs that are just monstrosities, in terms of the amount of revenue that they command and the amount of interest that they generate from the public. And so are we about to see maybe a little bit of a bubble bursting there? I think Rex's point is exactly why as a father, as somebody who's a professional, I don't have time, I don't have the resources anymore because it's become a very, very expensive proposition to go to Fayetteville for just a game day, if you will. And so it's a hard thing to do, and the ticket prices keep rising, and then, but yet with attendance falling, you can see where the slippery slope is going to be accelerated, if you will. And as you pointed out, Steve, this is a crossroads for the sport in general. This is a moment where the safety concerns that override it, the constant reports of heat-related deaths and illnesses and injuries that are traumatic, the CTE, everything that you're seeing from the NFL all the way down to Pop Warner and everything in between. It's a tough time to convince somebody, go lay your life on the line for a few years. And by the way, of course, another controversy we don't have time to get into is who's going to pay that bill.
Exactly.
You know? And but I definitely agree that this is a challenging time, and especially in a state like Arkansas, which is going to produce a far, far less prominent crop of high-end recruits every year, simply because we've dealt with that for decades.
Now there's the matter of athlete compensation. Oh, well, we're out of time next time. Guys, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Steve.
And I'm old. Beau,
Yeah,
thank you.
yes.
Thanks both of you for coming in. And we'll see you next week. Good Lord.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.